welcome. We're excited to be hosting Spaceflow's second LinkedIn Live event. I'm your host. If you don't know me, for those who don't know me, my name is Ondřej Vodňanský. I'm responsible for business development in CEE for Spaceflow. I will say a few words about Spaceflow just after introducing our guest. So today we will be talking all things ESG and sustainability with Steffen Walvius. Steffen, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi Ondřej. Thanks for hosting me. My name is Steffen Walvius and I work for JLL. I'm the head of sustainability and ESG services for Central Eastern Europe. And I just recently joined after having my own business and having worked in the construction and energy sector for over 10 years now. And I joined JLL to provide the much needed ESG services in the real estate sector. And I'm looking forward to talk with you this coming 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thanks a lot. From our side, the reason why we are interested in ESG, firstly, because it's an important topic for our clients, real estate landlords in office and residential segments, but also because we've recently introduced a new product extension called Flow, which helps landlords collect data on their building performance, which is what we find a key element in kind of starting an ESG strategy. But we'll get to that. Otherwise, we also help, our core value proposition is helping landlords manage their tenant relationships, reach and engage their tenants, and also simplify adoption and management of new smart technologies in buildings. So one more thing, because before we jump into actual discussion, there's a Q&A. So feel free to submit questions, and we'll try to answer as much as possible towards the end of today's broadcast, which will be about 30 minutes. So we can start. To set the stage, we actually spoke, Steffen, right at the start of the summer, and to me, at least, it felt like already back then, ESG and sustainability were really hot topics. But it's for me, it feels like over the course of the two summer months, they've become even more relevant for several reasons. We've seen extreme weather events. There was a tornado here in the Czech Republic, a heat wave in the Nordics, major floods in Western Europe. So we actually can feel the climate change in real life and with our own eyes. There has been the new climate report from the UN and IPCC, which which paints quite a dark picture in terms of climate change. And kind of closer to home, one of your competitors released a report that I think 20% of offices in London will not be fit for use in the next, I think, 10 years because of their age and not matching modern standards. So this is to set the stage. I want to ask you, do you feel like that over the last, let's say, 2 to 3 months, there has been already a difference in approach of investors, of clients? Do they come to JLL for advice, let's say, more than 6 months ago?
I joined in June, but I had JLL. Before that, I had my own business, and I already saw a growing demand in these services for investors, developers, owners, and managers. And basically, now since I joined JLL, I already see it's basically an explosion coming from these players for ESG services, because for many it is a bit of a jungle, with all the regulations, the market trends, and so forth. I don't know if the IPCC report was the reason why in the last month it was really exploding, but anything it supports, or it supports the idea, or let's say it confirms again that climate change is real and it's really happening, coming in fast. The real estate business has a giant footprint, so it's automatically we need to do something. Like I said, the market is moving quickly, and because the regulations and EU ambitions are now starting to come in. And starting to hinder the business as usual type of approach. So now you really see that investors need to act, prepare for changes that are upcoming. So it's a hot topic indeed. My goal, of course, I work for JLL, and JLL wants to be, of course, the front runner, and we are the first in here in Central Eastern Europe that offers these services. But my ultimate goal is to have the whole real estate sector decarbonize, and that's also the ambition from the EU, to have a decarbonized economy in 2050. And we cannot get there overnight, and the real estate especially needs a long road. And I know 30 years is very long for many investors to think about, but the first regulations are already coming in now, and that's why we have to act and prepare ourselves, because the earlier you are, the easier it goes.
Yes. Okay. Absolutely. Thanks for that. And I want to come back to this. You mentioned the regulations very quickly, but I thought it might be interesting for the broader audience just to touch on the abbreviation that is ESG, because I think that sometimes maybe misused. Or just used too broadly. And we had an interesting, when we spoke back at the beginning of summer, we had for me, it was like enlightening to understand how we approach it. So can you just maybe for our audience in a couple of sentences explain what it means and how it applies to your work?
Yeah, so it's a very good point, because a lot of people, it's unclear, and that's actually one thing that we do, is that we do a bit of education as well for investors. But ESG stands for environment, social, and governance, and that is basically our sustainability is now split into three. Let's say nothing has changed really, but we look at the environmental aspects, the social aspects, and the governance. For me, the E is very important, and I had the environment, especially when you look at the environment, we're talking about deforestation, depletion of resources, and waste. But most importantly, for most, and also for me, is mitigation of climate change, and that is basically CO2 emissions, or greenhouse gas emissions, or carbon, whatever you want to call it. A lot of regulations target the greenhouse gas emissions. Then we look at the S in the ESG, stands for social, and that I'm sure many of you know has been on the rise very quickly. It's about the health and well-being inside the building, but also the impact that you have on the community. And basically, this has a very it's gaining popularity, mostly because investors see a more direct link with financial performance. Let's say because with a building. That is very good for your employees. For example, it's believed that you have better retention of employees, maybe even better productivity, and evidence is coming in, trickling in slowly on that part. But so E is getting very big, especially in this market where employees are scarce. And the G is basically nothing more than it turns good environment and social intentions into good practice. So basically, if you have good governance, you can execute your environmental and social intentions. So that's the ESG. So that's a little bit of a crash course on the ESG, but of course there are many layers underneath. But that's good to know for the start. Yeah.
Absolutely, great summary. Thanks a lot for that. I think it's useful to really understand the various elements and how they link to the wider business. Because, for example, you mentioned the social, the health and well-being. I think that's kind of also talked about a lot these days. indoor air quality, but also generally, are people happy? Are they productive? So actually, the S is on its own is also very. It's a hot topic. It's increasingly a requirement. So I think it's important to understand this in the context of the whole ESG. The same obviously. Usually, when we talk about sustainability, we mean the environmental, but it's good to understand, I think, the context. So just coming back to what you talked about a couple of minutes before, which is the regulation is changing. So the way I'd like to ask is maybe, I think now compared to, let's say, 6 months ago, there will be much less people who will say that this is just the bus that will pass. This is just hype for consultants to earn money, such as yourself. But still, if anyway, to address this upfront, if somebody has the view that the ESG and sustainability is hype, what are the actual risks of not complying?
Well, so from a regulation point of view, I think there has not been a very big impact up till now. So you can still go about the way you did maybe 10 years ago. And of course, there are some stricter regulations and building codes when you build a new building. But from between 2023, so that's in 2 years, and 2030, legislation are increasing a lot from the EU, and then we've heard about the EU Green Deal, for example, and also, but for investors already, we have the SFDR, and then the linked EU taxonomy. So what? It is not. It's not a bandwagon at all anymore. Yeah, and so that is good to know. Right now, we see an effect more. The market is more putting a bigger effect on the market. Let's say because the nice thing about me joining JLL in June, just a little bit of a background. So I have my own consultancy firm, and of course I don't have any brokers, any valuers, no capital markets team or whatever. I was really just dedicated with some partners on like providing ESG services. But now I joined JLL, and I don't have to explain the JLL. I think it's a very big company, and they provide all sorts of real estate services. And what is nice is that I can see, I see these guys walking on the floor every day. And when we're talking about properties they want to sell or properties they want to lease, especially with the selling, we see that investors are now very careful in buying buildings that are not compliant with the upcoming regulations. So basically, the investors, they would put a bid on assets, but they will have assumptions saying, well, we expect this building is a Class A when it comes to energy efficiency. We expect it complies with the EU taxonomy. Maybe later a bit more about the EU taxonomy, but basically that is influencing the value, but in bigger extent the liquidity of the asset. So it's just some investors just drop out. The big responsible investors, they if they see a building on the market, they will look at it, but sometimes they won't even bid on it because they know it will not comply with their ambitions, or they just believe the building is very hard to decarbonize. So this is affecting that mostly at this point, but the regulation will directly affect going forward in the short term also. So
and also I think we should mention at least what we hear from our conversations. I'm sure your colleagues in the office leasing department are hearing it as well, and it's that it's the tenants, it's the large corporations who are pushing for sustainability, energy efficient buildings to occupy, right?
Yeah, actually, yeah. So I'm very much from the investor developer side, but also from the occupier side, it's a very big push. So from the investor side, you just have investors. They need to comply with a lot of regulations already, so they have to invest responsibly. And of course, the real estate developer wants to attract responsible investors, so he will try to make sure that the buildings are green. But from the tenants, the tenants are also looking for green and healthy buildings, and that is also affecting the business, and both influence each other. For example, if we talk about governance, if there is a building, an office building that has a controversial tenant, and that could be a tobacco industry or someone that's a company that's linked with the weapon industry. Some investors don't want to buy a building that has such a tenant. So it's also a little bit on that. So there are many factors that influence.
Okay. Great, thanks. So let's. What can maybe before one more question before we go to what should landlords and real estate owners actually do. I have one question, and which is, what are the biggest sins of buildings that you see on the market today?
The biggest sins. That's. I think. What I see a lot of, I mean, everyone wants to have everyone has a sustainability page on their website and everything. So and of course there is some greenwashing involved, which is slowly hopefully disappearing with a better definition from the EU what sustainability is. But you still see many companies, and this is a debated topic, so I have to be careful. But that simply say we are sustainable because all our assets have a green building certificate, like LEED or something like that. And yes, in many cases, there are cases that a very green or a building that is good. It has like a low carbon emissions, so is also certified. But you can also have buildings that are very inefficient and they still have a certification. So simply saying we are sustainable because we have all our assets are certified, I see through that. So I think, and I'm not saying green building certificates are bad. I think they're really valuable, and the reason why they are valuable because if you have an asset which is very energy efficient, it uses very little energy. I mean, my shed in the backyard uses very little energy as well, but you cannot live in it, right? You cannot work in it. So a BREEAM certification will show you that the building is also made of good quality and is practical, and you can use it. But if you want to address environmental stewardship, so mitigating climate change, you should also look at decarbonization pathways. The most popular one is the CRREM pathway, which stands for Carbon Risk Real Estate Monitor, which is very popular. Some building certifications already link it with pathways, but not all. So I'm just saying we should also include decarbonization pathways. So you can say all my buildings are sustainable, but you also have to address really your carbon over the coming, over the years and how you want to reduce that.
Okay. Again, that's something I will want to come back to in a minute. But if we stay on this topic, so sins, but actually on the property level, and by that, so I mean you already kind of touched on it, and that's the biggest sources of inefficiencies. Where do you actually see inefficiencies that would impact the building kind of rating?
So of course, LED lighting is a no-brainer. So if you don't have that yet, maybe you should look at that. But so we have certain steps, and first you have to understand your carbon emissions today, and what is your carbon emissions of the building. You have to know how much carbon you emit. So that's the first step. So data is very important, and tracking this. Also a nice link with space flow, of course. But it's very important that you understand your building, and then you maximize operational efficiency. So you look at your systems, your HVAC inside the building to to tweak that and make sure that they operate optimally. And then you go to the retrofit, or like really an intervention of the building. So putting LED on, putting solar panels on the roof, improving your thermal shell, stuff like that. So that's a third step, and then in generating on-site green electricity, of course, what I said with the solar panels, and then so basically you have to go through these steps, and you cannot just say, okay, we'll put solar panels on the roof, because then basically that's sometimes very an expensive thing to do, whereas optimizing your equipment that you currently have could be much cheaper, and also tracking it. So that's one thing that the real estate sector really has to do in that order.
Okay, great. So you already kind of answered my next questions, which is, what is, how does one start with an ESG strategy to decarbonize? So we kind of already addressed this, like with the first few steps.
Yeah.
I see you have something to add.
No, yeah, well, yeah. So basically, do you have where you have to start is you understand your own building. So let's say if you look at right now, majority of existing building stock has an energy intensity, so the energy per square meter per year of 250 kilowatt hours, for example, and then we have to reduce that. So maybe 120 kilowatt hours is a very good building, but in 2030 we already have to be at 70 kilowatt hours per square meter. So you have to realize that where you are right now and how to get there is quite a long way in some cases. And to prepare for that, you can get a decarbonization roadmap for your building. Something we do, for example, where you just look at the building, we investigate exactly the status of the building, and then propose measures over time, because that will decarbonize your building. We're not going to install batteries right now. They're expensive. They will get cheaper in the future. First, we look at the more sensible measures that you can do. But for a real estate developer or like an owner, it's also good to have an overall strategy where you start with the baseline. Who are your stakeholders, and then benchmark. Define your ambitions is very important, and a strategic plan. And this is a bit more high level corporate, so not on an asset level. Where you really get an ESG strategy at first, because without this strategy, it can be a little bit. It's hard to head the same direction all the time. So that's important. Yeah.
Great. Lots of information. Lots of possibilities. I really want to kind of stay with what's really kind of actionable for our listeners today. So we've talked strategy, decarbonization. What are some? And you mentioned LED lighting as kind of an easy win for landlords to actually save energy. What are some other easy wins? Can you think of any other?
So the not so sexy thing about real estate is that there is no magic solution or silver bullet or whatever you want to call it. So there's not one thing that will solve it all, unfortunately. So it's all tiny little things, and that makes it also a little bit, that makes it sometimes a little bit difficult to do. But really, if you look at the building, LED is in many cases a no-brainer. Installing LED, so replacing your T5 or T8, whatever you still have, and then but everybody did that almost. So if you haven't, we can help with that as well. But and then your biggest portion of electricity goes to space heating, right? So and so your heater, if you can already tweak the existing system with 10%, you already reduce 10%. But if the heating systems are much more efficient. So a heat pump, for example, an air. So you don't really have to drill down in the earth crust or whatever. You just have an air heat pump you can put on the roof. and that's much more efficient than for example, a gas boiler. And of course, I noticed that in Central Eastern Europe and everywhere else, new technologies like a heat pump, you always have the stories go around. Yeah, but if it's very cold, it doesn't work. Of course, if you have a building heat pump that's not that dimensioned properly, it will give you a little bit of trouble. But this is a really efficient thing. You can really reduce your energy bill by putting in efficient heating, and then all the other things come. Like replacing your windows is not the one you want to look at the beginning. It's very expensive, but at some point, all these measures, they come. There's a place and a time for them, and at some point they will have to be addressed. So, yeah, there's no magic solution. It's all little things, but you have to try from very sensible to the smaller and more expensive things. You all have to take them.
Yeah. Okay. I have a couple more questions. I think we might go a bit over time because there's so much to talk about. But let's take a look at what we have. So I have our head of marketing on the line. Peter, can you paste? No questions so far. Okay. So everyone who's listening, feel free to post questions. If you're missing something from what we've discussed so far. So one question I have, maybe more, and again, it's still really close to the discussion we have right now. You made a really interesting point that actually I like to parrot to when we last spoke. I like to parrot to in my conversations, and that's buildings. Net zero buildings that will be standing. 99% of net zero buildings that will be standing in 2050 are already standing today. I love it. It's a great way to put it. So, and we'll touched on some of the things that the landlords will have to do now. So now it may be, let's take a bit more further into the future. What will be some of the next steps that you can envision that landlords will have to do, let's say, in 2030, once they've installed the heat pumps, the LEDs, the solar panels? How do you see the next steps after that?
So if you have done everything, what you can sensibly do, like financially, and of course, there are some things that just get too expensive, but. The final step, if you have reduced your building emissions as much as possible, the final step, which is really a final step, not the first step, is offsetting your emissions. So basically, to have a net zero carbon building is quite tricky for existing building stock. So you either generate a lot of electricity on the roof or elsewhere. There is, and at some point you cannot reduce anymore sensibly. So then you have to offset, or you just make sure that other buildings in your portfolio compensate for a building that is not functioning, like does not comply with the decarbonization pathway. So that's one thing. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for that. So we have a question from the audience. What are your thoughts on X degree compatibility in real estate/retail sector?
To be honest, I don't know what it means. I maybe let me because I am very much. I'm an engineer. I went to school for engineering, and then I now rolled in the last 5 years into the real estate sector. And X degree, maybe some terms I still get them where I don't know what it is, but So I see there is another question. Is it from the same one? What differences can you see amongst market, or is it a different?
It's a different one. So let's.
Well,
so we
because
will ask.
Yeah.
If the person has a question on X degree, if they can specify what they mean, and let's look at the next one, which is what differences in kind of approach to sustainability and performance of landlords you see among markets. Yeah.
So I am very much from the logistic industrial background. So prior to this, I worked with P3 and now also CTP, and Before that, I was always doing concrete steel structures for industrial buildings. So that's very much my home. But they are always a little bit behind industrial sector. So when we look at offices, that's the first one. When you those are a bit more advanced when it comes to applying technologies and really also have a very improved interior for well-being, for example. Industrial is a little bit behind, and so every asset class is different. Maybe it's not a time to dive deep, but and across countries, I see. I'm from the Netherlands originally. I moved here 5 years ago, and the Netherlands is really. You can see that the regulations are coming in hard. For example, you cannot if your office building is not energy C or better, like energy label C, like you have on your fridge. So it's A, B, or C. If it's D, you cannot lease the asset anymore to anyone. In I don't know when the regulation starts, 2025, I believe. So yeah, that's so you can see the differences between the countries. Central Eastern Europe is a little bit behind on when you look at the West, but also that gives a lot of opportunity to learn from them and adopt the things that worked in Western countries. So that's the biggest opportunity for this region, the Central Eastern European region.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. We have another question, and that's a really interesting one. So, from Emma Peveril, how do you get tenant or occupier buy-in when there is generally pushback in not wanting to absorb costs through service charge? So tenants don't actually want to pay for it. So how do you go about it?
Yeah, a big issue. It's a very big issue. So that's why green leases are there, and a green lease is nothing more than just a lease agreement, but with green, let's say, clauses in there that state something about you have to share the data with your landlord, your consumption data, so the landlord knows how much you consume, and you have to maybe even separate waste. You can do all sorts of things, but the one super helpful one, if you manage to get that in the lease agreement, is that if you have the tenant is renting the space, and you as a landlord rent an older building to this tenant, and they agree on a lease for, let's say, let's 10 euros per square meter, and that's more logistical industrial price, but let's say 10 euro per square meter, and then if as a landlord, there's a clause you can put in there where you say, okay, any energy efficiency measures that I implement in the building that will reduce the operational cost for the tenant, and I can implement, and I can share the cost with the tenant. So let's say if the landlord invests money in the building that the tenant is renting, and it will reduce the operational cost with €1, he could theoretically increase the rent with €1. It never happens one-on-one, but if you have to be able to prove that this measure really creates that reduction in operational costs for the tenant, and then you can share the cost. But so it's very hard to have it to have.
But
this.
Generally, the green lease is a structure that I guess is coming from the West that will help with this. We have a question on facilitating ESG related data measuring and reporting. So I'll just use this opportunity to touch on kind of what we do as Space Flow. So we see we touched on this as well. Kind of part of the first step of the ESG strategy is understanding how the building actually performs, energy consumption, carbon footprint, air quality, as you said, Steffen. So, and it actually turns out it's quite difficult sometimes to get this information, or it can be very disparate. And one way to do that is obviously is to have smart technology such as sensors for the air quality and smart meters for the energy consumption. And we here at Spaceflow, we provide a platform to collect the data and visualize it and potentially provide it further as needed very easily to really save significant man hours and time in compiling this information and using it for communication with tenants, banks, regulators, bondholders, etc.
Yeah.
So
I just want to add, like, the data is the big is the weak point in the sustainability, making the real estate sector more sustainable. Data is a big issue because we need to know how our buildings perform if we want to, make calculations on what the effect will be on operational costs. We need to know what the consumption is, and this sounds very simple, but it's sometimes very hard to track this. And also for an investor, they need to report what their carbon emissions are on their whole portfolio. So they need to know this data also. So but a tenant naturally does not have that big of an interest to share this data. So there has to be also in your green lease the clause there saying that you share this data, and you can do a lot with data to optimize, identify there's something wrong at some point when there is some strange patterns. So yes, I think Spaceflow can help with that. So that's just my point on the data. I think I see some other questions coming in. I don't know if we.
Yeah. So let's wrap up. So I actually wanted to ask one. And by the way, thanks everyone for the questions so far. We will make sure to answer all of them and provide the information afterwards. But we so far we've only talked about office pretty much as a real estate segment, and we briefly mentioned industrial. What about residential, which is a very hot segment overall in the CE and globally? How do you see the residential market with regards to sustainability?
Yeah, so first of all, Resi is one of I have the least experience with, but I'm learning very quickly. We have our research department here in JLL is very good with Resi. I think they do a lot of work on residential sector, and we have Martin Vejraška, who is our sustainability research specialist, and I was expecting this question, so I asked him, like, what do you see? Well, we see that Resi to rent is really growing very quickly. In beginning of this year, there were 1,000 units built that were intended to be rented out. So an investor investors build 1,000 units for rent, and then at the end of next year it will be 2,000. So it will be doubling, right? So it's and these big residential blocks, they fall under an investor or an owner, and they are most likely they fall under the current legislation from the EU and maybe even national. So they have to report on their energy consumption. So I think these buildings will be treated a little bit as offices almost, where they have to be tracked. They have to track for each unit what the consumption is. And you can give something in return for the tenant, the occupier. But so really, the Resi to rent is growing, and that means that we have to track these the consumption of these buildings as well. And because the EU, just one thing, there's this EU Green Deal is currently being negotiated, but one of the things they want to do is have a carbon like emission trading scheme. So it is a cap on carbon emissions, which means that perhaps also your energy will become more expensive over the years. So an occupier will also be benefiting from any energy efficiency monitoring and improvements. So yeah, this will probably come more and more also in residential.
Yeah, one way I like to think about this is kind of in the office segment, it's the corporates who are pushing for sustainable buildings, and I think in part they're kind of signaling virtue to their potential employees and their business partners, and I'm sure that potential employees think about this when they are joining a company. But in the rental residential segment, the relationship is direct, and I think with the kind of increase in prominence of the Generation Z, as they increase in the population, and they are very climate conscious on the one side, and on the other side, with the increase of rental residential, the rental residential operators will want to be seen sustainably to attract the Gen Z renters as clients. Yeah. So I think that will, in the next couple of years, as the younger generation ages, I think this will become a strong motivator. The same way it is
the E, but also
in
the
office.
S. Yeah, like having healthy indoor air quality and lots of daylight. So yeah, the E and the S will be very very important. I think also because people starting to realize that we 90% of the time we are indoors. So and this. Even the air quality has an effect on how we behave and how we work and how we live. So yeah, this will be part of it too. So it's a very interesting part. Yeah.
Great. I think let's slowly wrap up. We could talk for a much longer period of time. Maybe we can do it another time. So.
Well, yeah, they should email us for if they have any questions. I'll look at these questions that are still outstanding. But maybe a good moment to give my email address if they have any questions. And
okay, so I was going to ask, where can people reach you?
Yeah, because I think I have with LinkedIn, I basically have it, I think, blocked for new connection, and because I was getting too many requests. But you can have you just send an email to my JLL email address, which is my first and last name with a dot in between. So Steffen Walvius and then at eu.jll.eu. Or .com, sorry, .com.
.com, sure. .com. You know what? So this, and by the way, this event, the recording of this event will be available afterwards to view. We will publish the remaining questions. We will publish answers to the remaining questions afterwards as well. I've just received a link, but we will try we will provide a list of answers. So recording will be available. By the way, stay tuned for a future LinkedIn live event with us. We will follow us on LinkedIn, Spaceflow. You can follow me. You can find me on Andrej Vodňanský. And just on this topic that we discussed, a shameless plug. So if your landlord is struggling with obtaining data about building performance, tenants or banks are asking for it, please reach out, or obviously feel free to reach out in relation to our core offering, which is tenant engagement, which is making sure that tenants feel connected to you and your building, to the service offering, etc. So again, follow us, email us at hello@spaceflow.io, leave us a comment on LinkedIn, etc. And yeah, we hope to see you at our next event.
Yeah, Andrej, thank you so much also for hosting. It was the first time for me to have a live event, but it's not that bad. So let's do it again.
It was great fun. Thanks a lot, Steffen. Thanks everyone. Take care. Have a nice afternoon.
Bye-bye.